Hey there boys and girls, my name is Kyle, and today we're going to be talking about what the heck is TypeScript. Basically, on a super high level, TypeScript just forces you to write better JavaScript. It does this because it's a superset of JavaScript. So all it does is it allows you to either type what your variables are, or it allows you to define custom interface objects that you can then use throughout your project. So we're going to cover both what typing is and quickly how to type something and why it's good to type things. And we're also going to cover a real world example where something was written in just plain old JavaScript, and the person that built this then passed it on to me to maintain, and then when the website that we'll be discussing went live, there was a lot of bugs associated with it, and this was a problem because it was an e-commerce website and people were able to do crazy things such as purchase products for a negative amount, which you think you'd be able to figure out pretty quickly, but apparently it just wasn't tested. And a lot of these bugs came from typing issues. So a lot of it was me spending hours trying to figure out exactly where things were getting set and where they were getting checked throughout this massive JavaScript file, and then trying to cast things as like ints or strings and doing a lot of type checking myself to make sure that the code that they've written made sense, because for some reason the way they wrote it is in some parts the variable needed to be a string because they're comparing it to a string, so like a 0 to the string of a 0 or something like that. But then later on they were also comparing it and making sure that it had to be a number, but they weren't parsing things in and out. So there was a lot of issues associated to it. So we're going to take a look at that real world example of how this could have been done a lot better, and how hours and hours and painstaking debugging that I had to go through could have been solved if it was written in something like TypeScript. Now, I'm not going to go through actually how to compile down TypeScript and how you would do like web packing for using bundles and modules and classes and stuff like that. I have a different video that will be coming out talking about how to build a more modern kind of like Webpack setup using TypeScript and Node.js. So look forward to that coming out soon. This video is just going to be about the basics of why you should be using TypeScript and how it can actually help you not only better understand the code that you're writing, but also how to write code even faster. So in this example right here, we have I being set to 0, but then on the very next line, I is set to hello. So we're switching from a number to a string. Now this was a little weird for me to start out with because I came from the world of C#, meaning that you had to declare things as public and private, and things had to be set up like this is an int, this is going to be a float, this is going to be a bool. You had to declare that stuff right off the bat. JavaScript to me felt like the Wild West. It was fun to code with, but you also have a lot of issues because things aren't typed. So in this file, if I want I to be 0 and then I set I to hello, this is 0 is never going to run. Now, you can screw things up like in this example, but also you could screw things up for someone else. So if I set I to 0 and then someone else in a different file, or they're working on something different, they set I, which is in this case global, to hello because they need it to be hello, we're then going to run into issues where we're conflicting with each other's types. But if we're using TypeScript and we can define I is always going to be a number, and then someone else comes along and defines I as a string, TypeScript is going to yell at them saying, hey, dummy, you're doing this wrong. This is supposed to be a number. So this is kind of how TypeScript can help not only you write better code, but also prevent you from screwing up someone else's code. So to set something as that, all you have to do is just add a colon and then define whatever it's going to be. So in this case, k is a number, and I'm setting it to 0. If you're confused about the let keyword here, it's basically the same thing as var, but in ES6 you can do lets, which will let you set it to whatever you want, and then you can do const, which is a constant, meaning that once you set it to something the first time, you're not able to switch it around and readjust things. So you can kind of lock it into that variable. So let k, defined as a number, equals 0. So right now this is fine because we're setting k to 3 and 3 is a number. However, if we change this to test, you can see that it's throwing an error. And that's because TypeScript's going to tell us that test, which is a string, is not assignable to type number. So we set this back to 3. This code's still not going to work because k needs to be 0, but at least we're not throwing issues. And if someone else on a different file or working on something different was working still on K within the global scope of the JavaScript, and they set it to hello, they're now going to get an error, and TypeScript is going to tell them, hey, someone else already defined this as something, and it will even tell you what file it's defined in. So they could hunt it down, and you could figure out who wrote this, or have a conversation about why is this defined as this. So if we head over to the real world example, this is a product website where all these different options for these types are different variants. So the overall product is stainless steel tags engraved and then whatever. So they have a bunch of different information. This all gets served up to the front end application through a JSON object. And this is where we run into some issues where sometimes there is a minimum quantity, like this one has a minimum of 5, and users were actually able to go below that, and eventually this became a negative number. That doesn't make sense. So if we look at the JSON object that actually gets returned from the server, it looks something like this. We're not going to go through all the different options and some of these additional like custom options, which is some complex arrays of like different variable data. We're just going to cover the basics of like what is an actual variant for this product. So basically it's an ID, title, SKU, price, and some like quantities and some weights and stuff like that. So it's just numbers and strings. So this is what the server gives us back. And this is actually the code from the website that the person initially wrote. I don't know why they didn't define this as an object and just convert the JSON object over, but this is the way they did it. And so now you can see I'm doing some weird like parsing floats of the length, but then also converting it to a string. I don't know why exactly I had to do this, but it's what I had to do to make it work, and I wasn't going to rewrite this entire thing. So sometimes you just have to quick hotfix things just to make it work, especially when it's a live website and customers are starting to order products. So how could this have been done better, but also in a way that just actually makes sense if you think about it? We head over into TypeScript. TypeScript not only allowing us to type things like weight is going to be a number, we can also define these interface objects. So when you're defining an interface object, all you have to do is interface, and then whatever it's going to be called. Interface object should always be interface object should always begin with a capital I. So in this case, we're defining what the base level variant object is going to be. So in this case, it's an ID, title, SKU, price, sale price is default, max quantity, min quantity, etc. And so we're typing these as the numbers and the strings and just kind of going back and forth. So if we look down here, we're defining let current variant, and we're typing it as our custom variant object. And that's going to yell at us if we were to remove one of these. So if I remove this, it's saying, hey, this isn't right anymore. And it's because the property quantity pricing is missing. So quantity pricing is defined as a number. It's missing. We need to fix that. So we add that back in. The typing still works the same. So if I change min quantity to a string, it's going to yell at us saying that the string is not assignable to the type of number. So we switch that back to a number. But then also we don't have to hard code everything and saying like you have to have all this stuff within this object. Some variable data can be optional. So we have color here. And by adding in this little question mark, it's saying that color can be defined, and when defined, it needs to be an object that contains this number and this string, but at the same time, it can also be missing. It's okay if it's not there. So in our example here for our current variant, we don't have a color object defined, and that's fine. So the reason why we do this is because then down below, we can say like current quantity, which is that little ticker we had on the website of going up or going down or inputting whatever you have. We're saying that that is going to be a number, and we're not going to let it not be a number. Then, because this is defined as a number, and our min quantity is defined as a number, and TypeScript will yell at us if it's not a number, we can then safely say, if current quantity is less than the current variant's minimum quantity, just set the current quantity to the minimum quantity. You can write it like this, compile it, throw it on a production website, and you know that it's not going to break without someone actually going into your code and maliciously trying to break this. So without people trying to specifically attack your website, it's just going to work. So this is why you should actually be typing things. So if this was the real world example of what it looked like on the website, first off, I wouldn't have had to go through and spend hours debugging and trying to drill down through all the code and figure out where things were getting set and where they were getting checked. But also, it just makes sense. And that's one of the great things about TypeScript is it forces you to really learn what you're doing. Now, you might have a pretty good understanding of like, okay, I know how to add 2 plus 2. We're going to get 5 every time, we know. But it forces you to really understand some of the even more complex things about the DOM and how things work. For example, a lot of people think that with a XML HTTP request, it's going to return the request, but actually it's going to return a progress event, and you have to actually store the request and try to grab that back. Another thing is on like a click event, people think you could do the event. So if you call the event E, so E.target, that's going to get what was actually clicked, but that's not going to actually return the element because E.target isn't always defined or available on that event. But what is always going to be available is current target. So you could do E.currentTarget, and if you want that to be an element, you could just cast it as an element. So it forces you to kind of learn these things, and it's a bit of a struggle bus, and you have to really figure things out, and you're going to be browsing a lot of like the W3 documentation, the MDM documentation, or even like Google's developer documentation. So there is a learning curve to figuring out how all this stuff works and getting used to always typing things. But once you understand it, not only do you just kind of understand how to use it, you actually understand on like a fundamental level of how things work, and it will work out both logistically but also like just logically. It just really kind of clicks once you get it. So if we head over to some other real world examples where I've been using TypeScript on things, this is just a simple little carousel gallery, so you can click through things, and wrote this in maybe 15 minutes tops, just pulling all the images from a content management system and then just throwing them in there. And you know, the backend logic for this, the JavaScript logic for this isn't anything crazy. It's just a carousel, but I was able to write it in a way where we're grabbing like the ID of each slide, and we're checking to see if we're at the end and if we need to loop back to the beginning of the array. Everything just kind of lines up, comes together, and if you type everything correctly and you just generally kind of understand how elements work and what properties are available to you, which you will learn by just using TypeScript because it won't let you not use them, you can end up writing things a lot faster and bug-free on your first compile and your first use. You can even do a little bit more advanced things, such as this Ajaxing and then doing push states, and let's say if you want to like swap out to like auditorium types and swapping out from page to page. A little bit more complex things that have a bit more moving pieces between all the different filter types and paginated content, requesting it all from the server, doing push states with like based on what the filter types are. You know, you're still going to run into some issues. It's not going to be like I can write everything perfectly the first time around, but it definitely helps you make sure that what you're writing not only makes sense, but is just going to work. So if TypeScript isn't something that you're currently using or looking into, it's definitely something that you should at least try, whether it's just something little and simple. I have a simple sandbox framework that uses Node Sass, TypeScript, and Webpack, so you can just kind of mess around with learning classes and modules and loading everything in and getting used to typing things and just kind of having fun and experimenting, all in a way that's set up to already use like the GitHub pages through the docs folder, so you can just set up a repository, drop that in there, and just kind of play around with things and still be able to link out to and share with people and get their feedback or ask questions. So I'll be covering a video about setting up the sandbox and kind of how things work, and we'll start diving into some more like the ES6 stuff when it comes to classes and declaring things. But you know, if you're not already using it or at least looking into it, TypeScript is definitely something that's worth some time. Even if you're not going to use it in your day-to-day for whatever development work or whatever coding work you do, it's still fun to play around with. And you know, at the end of the day, it forces you to really learn what you're doing on just a fundamental level. So I think it's worth looking into. That's about it for this video. Thanks for watching.